Welcome to the Wellness Lab Digest, where we help you to absorb powerful, life-changing insights from top wellness experts with our daily bite-sized wellness podcast summaries. Each episode is packed with distilled, powerful takeaways to boost your health and well-being. To support this podcast, please scroll down on whatever app you're listening. Ratings and reviews are helpful. Even better, just send the show to a friend. Check out our sponsors at the bottom of the page, or simply click the Support the Show link below the episode description. What if I told you that 85% of our fears about failure have nothing to do with actually failing? Today, we're exploring 5 questions that completely transform how we think about fear, success, and living an authentic life.
You know what's fascinating about those statistics on fear? They reveal how much of our anxiety comes from imagined scenarios rather than real threats.
Let's dive into that first crucial question. Why am I so afraid of failing? Research shows that our brains actually process social rejection in the same regions that process physical pain. That's why the fear of others' judgment can feel so visceral.
That explains the story of Molly, the interior designer who felt paralyzed by comparing herself to a less experienced colleague's social media success.
Exactly. And studies show that 92% of our worries never actually materialize. Yet here was Molly, with years of experience and satisfied clients, letting her fear of judgment hold her back.
So, what's the science behind why we get so caught up in these comparison traps?
Well, it's fascinating. Researchers have found that social media triggers the same dopamine pathways as gambling. We're literally addicted to comparing ourselves to others. But here's where it gets interesting. Studies show that successful people fail about twice as often as those who give up.
That connects perfectly to the second question about asking for what we need. The data on this is pretty striking.
Oh yeah. A recent study found that 70% of people feel uncomfortable asking for help, yet 90% of people report feeling good about being asked to help others. Isn't that wild? We're all afraid to ask, but we actually love being asked.
You know what makes that even more interesting? The cultural differences in how different societies view asking for help.
Right? In collectivist cultures, asking for help is seen as strengthening community bonds, while in individualistic societies, it's often viewed as a weakness. But here's the kicker. Psychological research shows that vulnerability actually increases trust and connection.
That brings us to the third question about what's stopping us from living the life we want. The research on this is pretty eye-opening.
Studies show that 76% of people identify external factors as their main obstacles, but when researchers dig deeper, internal beliefs and fear account for about 80% of what's actually holding people back.
That really challenges our assumptions about what's really stopping us, doesn't it?
And speaking of assumptions, let's talk about procrastination. New research suggests it's not about time management at all, it's an emotional regulation problem. When we procrastinate, we're actually trying to manage negative emotions.
That completely shifts how we should approach overcoming procrastination, doesn't it?
Absolutely fascinating. Studies show that people who practice self-compassion are actually 60% more likely to take action after failure than those who are self-critical. The let them approach builds on this by acknowledging our fears while moving forward anyway.
You know, that reminds me of the research on emotional maturity and decision-making.
Oh man, this is where it gets really interesting. Neuroscience shows that emotional reactions happen about 200 milliseconds before our rational brain kicks in. That's why the fifth question about managing others' emotional responses is so crucial.
The implications for relationships and personal growth are pretty significant.
Well, consider this. Studies show that understanding emotional patterns can reduce conflict in relationships by up to 50%. When we recognize that adults often react from childhood emotional patterns, it completely changes how we respond.
That's fascinating. How does this understanding translate into practical steps for personal growth?
Research indicates that people who practice mindful awareness of their emotional triggers show a 40% improvement in decision-making quality. It's about building that pause between stimulus and response.
And how does this connect to designing our dream life?
Here's what's amazing. Longitudinal studies show that people who align their actions with their values report 64% higher life satisfaction. But here's the catch. Only about 14% of people regularly reflect on what they truly want versus what others expect of them.
Those numbers really put things in perspective.
And here's where it all comes together. When people apply these 5 questions consistently, researchers found a 72% increase in goal achievement and a 45% reduction in anxiety about others' opinions.
That's remarkable. What would you say is the key takeaway for our listeners?
Well, the research is clear. Transformation happens in small steps. Studies show that people who focus on 1% improvements rather than dramatic changes are 85% more likely to achieve their goals. Remember, it's not about eliminating fear. It's about building the courage to move forward anyway.
That's such a powerful way to wrap up our discussion.
Thank you all for joining us today. Remember, your dream life isn't built on fearlessness. It's built on taking action despite your fears, one small step at a time. Thank you for listening to the Wellness Lab Digest. If you have received value from the podcast, I have 3 asks of you. 1, share the show with your friends and send them a link to the show. 2, please leave a rating and review in whatever app you're listening. And last but not least, please let me know what topics you would like us to cover in the future. You can contact me by sending me a message using the Send Us a Text link below the episode description.